My husband was sleeping with my stepmother. I realized it the exact moment she reached up and adjusted his tie. Right in front of my father's coffin. No one else noticed it, only me. It was such a quick touch, less than a second, but intimate enough to make my stomach twist. Ethan stood beside me in his black suit, one hand resting gently on my back like the perfect husband. And Vanessa Calloway, the woman who had been sobbing dramatically over her husband's coffin barely 10 minutes earlier, looked at him with the kind of eyes women only use for men they sleep with. "You okay?" Ethan leaned down and whispered. I stared at him for a few seconds before nodding. Yeah. But the truth was, that was the moment I started realizing something was terribly wrong. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32 years old. I live in Boston. And this is the story of how I discovered my husband was having an affair with my stepmother, and how I eventually learned they had been destroying my life together for years. If someone had told me this story a year ago, I would have laughed and said it sounded too insane to be real. But that's the thing about wealthy families. The more money involved, the more disgusting secrets they hide. My father's funeral was held at a massive church north of Boston. The place was packed. My father, Richard Bennett, owned Bennett Group, a successful real estate investment company. He was the classic self-made millionaire, the kind of man who started with nothing and became rich before 40. To outsiders, he looked perfect. To me, he was the kind of father who always loved work and new wives more than his own daughter. My biological mother died of cancer when I was 13. 2 years later, Vanessa appeared. Blonde hair, perfect skin, honey-sweet voice. She was almost 20 years younger than my father. The first day she met me, she knelt down to my eye level and said softly, "Claire, I know no one could ever replace your mother, but I'll do my best to love you like my own daughter." Sounds touching, right? I thought so too, until later that same night when I overheard her laughing on the phone with a friend. "That girl looks at me like a stray dog," she said. "But whatever, Richard's rich." That was the first moment I realized Vanessa didn't love my father. She loved his money. But I was 15, and my father was so obsessed with her that he became completely blind. Every time I tried to warn him, he got angry. "You're always unfair to Vanessa. You don't want me to be happy? Vanessa has tried so hard with you." Eventually, I learned to stay quiet, and Vanessa won. She slowly took control of everything in the house, from how I dressed to what college I chose. When I decided to study interior design instead of law, she smiled coldly across the dinner table. That's a cute little career for girls who like to play around. I still remember the disappointed look on my father's face that night. Vanessa was talented in a terrifying way. She was never openly cruel. She just planted poison into people's minds little by little, like slow drip venom. Quiet, patient, deadly. Ethan entered my life when I was 25. We met at a bar in Chicago while I was there for work. He was handsome in that classic American way. Tall, dark brown hair, dimples when he smiled. He told me he was an architect who loved jazz music and hated rich people who showed off their money. Funny enough, that was exactly my type. Looking back now, I realize he was almost too perfect, like someone had designed him specifically for me. But when you're in love, you don't notice those things. Ethan chased me for nearly a year before proposing. During that entire time, Vanessa absolutely adored him. Honestly, I think she liked him more than my father. Claire finally found a man worthy of her, she'd always say in front of people. One Christmas, I even caught Vanessa hugging Ethan a little too long in the kitchen. But the second I walked in, she stepped away and laughed. I was just thanking Ethan for helping me get the wine. I ignored it. That was the biggest mistake of my life. The first 7 years of our marriage looked normal from the outside. Not perfect, but stable. We didn't have children, partly because Ethan said he wanted to be financially secure first. But another reason was because I miscarried 3 years ago, and that experience almost destroyed me completely. What I never told anyone was this. The night I lost the baby, Ethan wasn't at the hospital. He claimed he was meeting a client in New York. I spent 6 hours alone in the emergency room, watching blood run down my legs while wondering why my husband wouldn't answer his phone. He showed up the next morning looking devastated. He held me and cried, "I'm so sorry. My phone died." I believed him. God, I was stupid. Later, I discovered that night he had actually been in Miami with Vanessa. And somehow, that still wasn't the worst part. Over the last 2 years, Ethan's architecture business started collapsing. He became stressed, angry, and drank too much. At one point, I found out he owed over $40,000 in online gambling debt. He fell to his knees, crying like a child. I swear this is the last time. I was the one who paid off his debt. I was also the one covering the mortgage, insurance, and nearly all our living expenses for almost a year. And during all of it, Vanessa constantly defended him. Men make mistakes when they're under pressure, she'd tell me gently. You should be softer with your husband. Looking back now, they were probably already sleeping together by then. The funeral ended around 5 in the evening. As guests slowly left the church, I went back inside to grab my phone. And that moment destroyed my entire life. I heard soft laughter behind the priest's dressing room door. Then Vanessa's voice. You're horrible. I froze. Ethan answered a second later. You started it. My blood turned to ice. I stood there completely motionless, trying to convince myself I had misunderstood. Then Vanessa laughed quietly again. If Claire ever finds out, she'll die. Ethan laughed too. She won't. I honestly don't remember how I left the church. I only remember how cold the air felt outside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car. I sat alone in the parking lot for almost 2 hours without crying. My mind was completely blank. My husband and my stepmother. On the day of my father's funeral. There are betrayals that hurt you, and then there are betrayals that kill something inside you forever. That night, Ethan came home around 10. He walked into the kitchen looking exhausted and wrapped his arms around me from behind. Have you eaten yet? I looked down at the hands touching my waist and felt physically sick. Just hours earlier, those same hands had been touching Vanessa. But somehow I still turned around and smiled at him. Not yet. He kissed my forehead. Poor baby. I almost cried right then, not because I was heartbroken, because I was disgusted. And then, 3 days later, something happened that made everything even worse. A message appeared on Ethan's Apple Watch while he was in the shower. I missed you so much last night. Does Claire suspect anything? Sender, Vanessa. I stared at the message for 5 full seconds. Then I opened the entire conversation. And that was when the real hell began. I don't know what betrayal feels like for other people, but for me, it didn't feel like heartbreak or despair the way movies describe it. It felt like someone had poured ice water directly down my spine, cold, numbing, so disgusting I could barely breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed holding Ethan's Apple Watch, while the sound of running water echoed steadily from behind the bathroom door. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the watch onto the floor, but I still opened the messages. The first text I read was from the night before. Vanessa, I can still smell your cologne on me. Ethan, you looked so damn beautiful last night. Vanessa, you liked the black dress? Ethan, I liked taking it off even more. I had to cover my mouth to stop myself from throwing up right there. There were over 3,000 messages. 3,000, which meant this wasn't a few stupid impulsive mistakes. It was a real relationship. I kept scrolling obsessively like someone deliberately torturing herself. Hotel photos, sexts, pictures of Vanessa wearing my husband's shirt, photos of Ethan lying in a bed I immediately recognized as the master bedroom in her Manhattan penthouse. Then I found an older message from almost a year earlier. Vanessa, she's starting to depend on you now. Ethan, easier than you thought. I froze. Depend? That wasn't how people talked about marriage. That was how people talked about a plan. I kept scrolling, and then I read the messages that turned my blood completely cold. Vanessa, Richard is changing the will soon. Ethan, good. Vanessa, once this is over, Claire won't have anyone except you. Ethan, that'll make her easier to control. I heard the bathroom door open at that exact moment. Instinctively, I locked the watch screen and placed it back exactly where it had been. Ethan walked out with a towel around his waist, his hair still wet. He smiled at me. You okay? I had never worked harder in my life than I did in that moment to keep my face normal. I'm fine. He walked over and kissed the top of my head. I was thinking, maybe we should go to Aspen next week for a few days. You need a break after everything with your dad. Aspen. Even now, hearing that name still gives me chills, But back then, I didn't know why yet. I only knew I was staring at the man I'd shared a bed with for 7 years and suddenly realized I didn't recognize him at all. That night, I pretended to have a headache so he wouldn't touch me. Ethan acted concerned, made me tea, and sat there stroking my hair for nearly half an hour. That's the terrifying thing about good liars. They never stop performing. Sometimes I think they even start believing their own act. After Ethan fell asleep, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried for the first time. But I wasn't crying because he cheated on me. I cried because I realized I had lived like a fool for years. The signs had always been there. I just chose not to see them. Ethan hated when I worked too much because he wanted me home more. Ethan didn't like me traveling with friends. Ethan always insisted on controlling our joint accounts. And every time I felt something was off about Vanessa, he made me feel crazy for questioning her. You're overthinking. Vanessa genuinely loves you. You should probably go to therapy, Claire. Gaslighting. That's the word Marcus later used. Making someone slowly distrust their own instincts until they become emotionally dependent on the person manipulating them. And I had fallen into that trap for years without realizing it. The next morning, I started investigating. Not the dramatic kind you see on TikTok. No screaming, no hacking phones. I did exactly what my mother taught me before she died. When you suspect someone, don't scream. Stay quiet and observe. People always reveal themselves when they think they're safe. I created a secret email account. I photographed every message from Ethan's watch, sent everything to myself, then erased the evidence. Over the next 2 days, I started noticing everything. Ethan took his phone into the bathroom more often. Vanessa suddenly texted me constantly. Did you sleep okay? Have you eaten? If you need to talk, I'm always here. I used to think she was just fake. Now I realized she was checking whether I suspected anything. Then Friday night came. Ethan said he had to meet a client in Manhattan. I smiled and nodded like always. Drive safe. But the second he left, I called an Uber and followed him. That was the moment the last piece of hope inside me died. Ethan's car stopped outside Vanessa's penthouse building. I sat in the taxi half a block away and watched my husband step out of the car and ring the bell. Vanessa opened the door almost immediately, and she kissed him before the door even closed. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. I just sat there staring like a ghost. The taxi driver even turned around and asked if I was okay because my face had gone completely pale. I told him I was fine and handed him another $100 to keep waiting. Ethan stayed there for almost 4 hours. Close to midnight, the penthouse curtains opened. I saw Vanessa wearing a red silk robe, holding a glass of wine. Ethan stood behind her with his arms wrapped around her waist. Then he lowered his head and kissed her neck exactly the way he used to kiss mine. It felt like someone crushed my heart with their bare hands. But then something even worse happened. Vanessa laughed and said something. Ethan laughed too. Then both of them looked down toward the street below, where I was sitting inside the taxi. I immediately ducked my head on instinct. My entire body went ice cold. Oh my God, did they see me? I could barely breathe for the next 10 minutes. But eventually Ethan pulled the curtain shut again. That's when I realized I was sweating even though it was barely 50 degrees outside. That night when Ethan came home, he climbed into bed and wrapped his arms around me like always. I lay there silently in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat pounding inside my chest. And then Ethan whispered something that still haunts me to this day. I don't know what I'd do if I lost you. I stared at the ceiling the entire night, and for the first time in my life, I became afraid of my own husband. 3 days later, my father's will was read, and that was when I realized this was far worse than just an affair. The reading took place at our family's private law office in downtown Boston. I sat beside Ethan. Vanessa sat across from us in a high-neck black dress, her eyes perfectly red and swollen like she had cried all night. If I hadn't known the truth, I probably would have felt sorry for her. My father's attorney, Howard Green, opened the file and began reading. At first, everything sounded fairly normal. Some charitable donations, several properties transferred to the company. But then he said the next sentence. The controlling shares of Bennett Group will be transferred to my wife, Vanessa Calloway Bennett. I honestly thought I had misheard him. My father had told me for years that the company would eventually belong to me, not because he loved me deeply or anything sentimental like that, but because I was his only child, and Bennett Group was the family business. But that wasn't even the worst shock. Howard continued reading. The Cape Cod property shall be sold, and the proceeds transferred into a trust managed by Vanessa Bennett. I clenched my fist so hard my nails dug into my palms. That house had belonged to my mother. She left it to me before she died. My father had never had the legal right to sell it. And to my daughter, Claire Bennett. Howard paused for a moment. $50,000. The room went completely silent. I could hear the ticking clock on the wall. $50,000. While my father's estate was worth at least $50 million. Ethan immediately grabbed my hand like he was afraid I might collapse. Claire. I almost laughed right there. What a flawless performance. The man secretly sleeping with my stepmother was now pretending to be the devastated husband comforting me. Vanessa turned toward me with fake sympathy painted all over her face. Richard thought this was the best way to protect you. Before I could respond, Howard spoke again. In addition, Mr. Richard Bennett appointed Ethan Cole as financial advisor for the family's new investment trust. I turned sharply toward my husband. Ethan froze for half a second. Just half a second. But it was enough. Enough for me to know he already knew about all of this. My stomach dropped so violently it felt like I might pass out. After the reading, Ethan tried pulling me into his arms in the parking garage. I know this is hard to accept. I shoved his hand away for the first time in 7 years of marriage. Ethan looked genuinely startled. I stared at him for a few seconds before asking quietly, "You knew beforehand, didn't you?" "Knew what?" "Stop acting, Ethan." His eyes changed instantly, just for a split second, but I saw it. That soft, perfect expression disappeared in less than a heartbeat and was replaced by something far colder, something calculating. Then it vanished again so quickly it almost felt unreal. "Claire, you're in shock." He stepped closer, reaching for me again. "We should go home and rest." I hated myself because part of me still wanted to believe him, because when you love someone for too long, your brain will invent any excuse necessary to avoid facing the truth. But that night, everything started falling apart faster than I expected. I was standing in the kitchen when Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up. A message from Vanessa. How did the girl react? I stared at those words for 3 full seconds. Not Claire. Not her. The girl. The way people talk when they're discussing a target together. Ethan walked into the kitchen at that exact moment, and for the first time, he saw me holding his phone. We both froze. The air between us became so heavy I thought I might suffocate. "Claire," he said quietly, "don't." I raised my hand to stop him. "Don't lie to me anymore." Ethan's face went pale. But the thing that truly terrified me was this. He didn't panic. Not at all. He simply stood there for a few seconds, then sighed like a man too exhausted to keep pretending. "How much of the truth do you want to know?" My heart pounded so hard it hurt. "All of it." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from me. The kitchen light cast sharp shadows across his face, making him look strangely cold. "Vanessa and I," he hesitated, "we didn't just start recently." I let out a hollow laugh. "A year?" Ethan stayed silent, and somehow that silence chilled me more than words could have. 2 years? Still nothing. I felt like I was going insane. "How long, Ethan?" He looked directly into my eyes and said the sentence that made my entire body go numb. "Since before I married you." I don't remember standing up. The chair crashed backward onto the floor. "What?" Ethan immediately stood too. "Claire, listen to me. You were sleeping with her before you married me?" I screamed so hard my voice cracked. Ethan dragged a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I barely recognized my own voice anymore. "My stepmother hired you to seduce me into marriage?" Ethan didn't answer immediately, and that silence gave me the answer already. I took a step backward like someone had slapped me across the face. Oh my God. Oh my God. It was all real. Ethan sat back down, both hands gripping his hair. "At first, yes. Vanessa approached me first." I couldn't breathe anymore. The kitchen started spinning around me. "She wanted someone close to you," Ethan said quietly. "Someone who could make you emotionally dependent. Someone who could influence your decisions." I laughed. A broken, terrifying sound that barely sounded human. "So my entire marriage was a scam?" "No." Ethan looked up immediately. "Not all of it." "You think I still believe you?" And then Ethan said something that disgusted me for months afterward every time I remembered it. I really did fall in love with you. I stared at the man sitting in front of me, the man who held me every night, the man who said he wanted to grow old with me, the man who held my hand and cried when I lost our baby. And for the first time in my life, I realized there are people who lie so well that eventually even they start believing their own lies. I thought I would lose my mind, but strangely, I became calm, very calm. I slowly pulled my chair back upright and sat down again. Ethan watched me carefully. Claire, I asked softly, what does Vanessa really want? Ethan hesitated for several seconds. The money. That's all? He looked away from me, and in that exact moment, I knew there was something even worse he still hadn't told me. Ethan stared down at the table for a long time before answering me. I still remember the sound of the kitchen clock ticking, each second dragging by like torture. Finally, he spoke quietly. Vanessa thinks your father was hiding something else. I frowned. What do you mean? Ethan looked up at me. A trust fund. I had never heard anything about that before, and judging by my expression, Ethan knew immediately. You really didn't know? Know what? Ethan cursed under his breath and stood up, pacing around the kitchen like he was trying to figure out how much he should say. Your father moved a large amount of money out of Bennett Group over 10 years ago. How much? About 20 million. I laughed because it sounded completely insane. You seriously expect me to believe? Claire, Ethan cut me off. I've seen the documents. The blood in my body slowly turned cold. $20 million doesn't just disappear. I grew up in that family. How could I not know? Vanessa believes your father hid the money under your name, Ethan continued, and she thought that if she controlled you, eventually she'd find it. I stared at him. So she hired you to get close to me? Ethan closed his eyes. At first, yes. How much? What? How much did she pay you to marry me? He stayed silent for a few seconds. 100,000. It felt like someone crushed my heart with their bare hands. $100,000. 7 years of my life. A child I lost. A marriage I thought was fate. All worth $100,000. But Ethan still wasn't finished. I could see it in his eyes. What else? He looked at me for a long time before speaking hoarsely. Claire, your miscarriage. I froze. What about it? Ethan swallowed hard. The night you went to the hospital, I wasn't in New York. I started struggling to breathe. I know. You were with Vanessa. Not just that. Ethan could barely look at me anymore. Vanessa switched your medication before that trip. Every sound around me disappeared. A loud ringing filled my ears like a bomb had gone off beside my head. You said, what? Ethan dragged his hands through his hair violently. Vanessa said it would only make you more tired. She wanted you to lose the Chicago design contract so you'd become more financially dependent on me. I stared at him, my entire body shaking. And you knew? Ethan actually started crying then. I didn't know what she switched it with. I swear to you, Claire, I never thought it would make you lose the baby. I shot to my feet and slapped him so hard my own hand hurt. Ethan didn't dodge. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. My baby died, my voice broke. Because of you two? Claire, my baby died because of you two! I had never screamed that loudly in my life. Ethan dropped to his knees right in front of me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I backed away from him like I was looking at a monster. And right then, Ethan's phone vibrated. Both of us looked down at the screen. Vanessa calling. Ethan went pale. I wiped my tears away and grabbed the phone before he could stop me. Hello? The line went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then Vanessa laughed softly. So the little girl finally knows? I clenched the phone so tightly my hand started hurting. You killed my baby? Vanessa sighed like I was asking something terribly inconvenient. Oh, Claire, don't be so dramatic. I could barely believe what I was hearing. It was only a few weeks old. There are moments when anger becomes stronger than pain, and at that moment, what I felt was no longer grief. It was hatred. The kind of hatred so deep it turns cold. You're sick. Vanessa laughed again. No, Claire, I'm just smarter than you. Before I could respond, her voice lowered. Oh, and if I were you, I wouldn't sleep alone tonight. My heart stopped. What does that mean? You think Ethan told you everything? I turned sharply toward my husband. Ethan looked completely terrified. Vanessa, don't. But she cut him off, sounding almost amused. Do you know why your father changed his will? I stopped breathing. Because before he died, he started becoming suspicious. Suspicious of what? Vanessa was silent for a few seconds before slowly saying each word. That Ethan wasn't the first man I slept with in your family. The entire world stopped spinning. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut like a man being sentenced to death. And me? I felt the blood inside my body freeze completely. Vanessa's voice became almost a whisper through the phone. Ask your husband why your father stopped speaking to him for 3 months before he died. Slowly, I turned toward Ethan, and for the first time in my life, I saw someone who looked both guilty and terrifying at the same time. I stared at Ethan while my mind went completely blank. There are moments when a person is so shocked they stop feeling anything at all. All that's left is a freezing emptiness inside your chest. What is she talking about? I asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer. That alone was enough to make me lose my mind. Ethan! He sat down slowly, hands trembling as he grabbed his head. I had never seen him like this before. No confidence, no charm, no calculated control. Just a man who was genuinely terrified. And somehow, that scared me even more. Your father found out about me and Vanessa about 4 months ago. My throat tightened. He caught you together? Ethan nodded faintly. At the penthouse. A broken laugh escaped my mouth. Oh my God! My father knew his daughter's husband was sleeping with his wife? Ethan shut his eyes like he couldn't even bear hearing the words out loud. He punched me. The image hit me so hard I felt nauseous. Richard Bennett, a man who had spent his entire life protecting his image of power and perfection, walking into a room and finding his wife in bed with his daughter's husband. Just imagining it made me sick. What happened after that? Ethan was silent for a few seconds. Vanessa convinced him to keep quiet. How? Ethan looked up at me. She told him that if the truth came out, you'd fall apart. I went completely still. That was the sickest thing about Vanessa. She always used other people's love as a weapon against them. My father stayed silent not because he forgave them, but because he was afraid I wouldn't survive the truth. And that silence killed him. After that, your father wanted to change the will, Ethan continued. He said he wanted to cut Vanessa out of the company. My heart pounded harder. But in the end, he transferred almost everything to her. Ethan nodded slowly, because Vanessa threatened him. A chill crawled down my spine. With what? For the first time since this conversation started, Ethan looked directly into my eyes. She said she would tell you that your father had an affair with her mother. I frowned for several seconds before I understood. Then my entire body froze. What? Ethan swallowed hard. Claire, Vanessa isn't a stranger. I felt like I couldn't stay sitting anymore. Explain. But before Ethan could speak, my phone vibrated. A new email. No sender name, just one attached file. Open it. Vanessa's voice came through Ethan's phone, which was still connected. My hands shook as I opened the file. It was a DNA test result. It took me almost 10 seconds to understand the words in front of me. Probability of sibling relationship, 99.8%. I couldn't breathe anymore. No. Ethan shot to his feet. Claire. I looked up at him as if the entire world had just collapsed. Vanessa is my half-sister? No one answered, but the silence was answer enough. I started laughing. A twisted, broken laugh that sounded almost insane. That's impossible. Vanessa sighed softly through the phone. Your mother stole my father from my mother. Then you stole the life that was supposed to be mine. I could barely hear anymore. Ethan stepped toward me, trying to help me stand, but I yanked my arm away. Don't touch me. I ran into the bathroom and threw up into the sink. Vanessa. The woman I had called my stepmother for 15 years. The woman sleeping with my husband. The woman who may have killed my father. Was my half-sister. This was more twisted than any movie I had ever seen. I slid down onto the bathroom floor, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Memories started warping inside my head. The way Vanessa used to look at me with random flashes of hatred. The comments like, "Claire always gets everything so easily." The arguments she had with my father after she thought I was asleep. Oh God. She had hated me long before she ever entered this house. Not because I was selfish, not because I was difficult, but because from the very beginning, my existence was proof that my mother had won. Ethan stood outside the bathroom door for a long time before finally speaking. "Claire, please open the door." I didn't answer. "I know you hate me," he said hoarsely, "but you're in real danger." I let out a cold laugh. Danger? I opened the door and stared directly at him. "The person who wanted me dead is standing right in front of me, and you still have the nerve to say that?" Ethan went pale. "I never wanted you dead." "Aspen." I said only that one word, and his entire body froze. I knew I was right. "She told you to take me to Aspen for what?" Ethan stayed silent for a few seconds too long, then finally whispered, "An accident." I felt the blood in my body turn to ice. Ethan rushed toward me, but I changed my mind. "When?" "After your father died." He looked close to tears again. "Claire, when I saw you at the funeral, I couldn't do it anymore." I looked at the man standing in front of me and felt a level of disgust so deep it made me cold. "You want me to be touched by that?" "No." Ethan shook his head repeatedly. "I know I'm a piece of shit, but Vanessa is really losing control now. She's not going to stop." And right then, the doorbell rang. Both Ethan and I flinched. It was nearly midnight. There was only one person it could be. Ethan looked at me, completely pale. "Don't open the door." Then Vanessa's voice came from outside the apartment, soft, calm, and somehow more terrifying than screaming. "Claire, I think we should talk face to face." The entire apartment fell silent after Vanessa said that. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Ethan immediately stepped in front of me on instinct. "Don't open the door." His voice was low and urgent. I had never seen Ethan afraid of anyone before. That should have satisfied me. Instead, it only made my skin crawl. Vanessa knocked again. 3 soft, even taps. Knock, knock, knock. "Claire?" Her voice was sweet enough to sound sickening. "I know you're in there." Ethan leaned closer and whispered quickly, "Listen to me. Don't let her in." "Why?" I stared at him. "You think she's going to shoot me?" Ethan didn't answer immediately, and that silence sent ice through my veins. Oh God, he really thought she was capable of it. The knocking came again, harder this time. "Claire, open the door." I don't know what took over me in that moment. Anger, curiosity, or complete recklessness. But I walked toward the door. Ethan grabbed my wrist immediately. "Don't." I looked down at his hand before slowly pulling away. "I'm tired of being afraid." And I opened the door. Vanessa stood there wearing a cream-colored coat that reached her knees, blonde hair falling over her shoulders, red lipstick flawless like she had just stepped out of a photo shoot instead of arriving at her lover's apartment at midnight. But her eyes, they were completely different. No fake warmth left, only something cold and exhausted. Vanessa looked at Ethan first, then let out a quiet laugh. "You told her more than I expected." Ethan clenched his jaw. "You're insane, Vanessa." "Oh no." She stepped into the apartment without waiting for permission. "I'm finally the only sane person here." I shut the door behind her. "What do you want?" Vanessa turned toward me, and for the first time in my life, I felt like she was looking at me as an actual person. Not the annoying stepdaughter, not a pawn, but something far more personal. "I want you to understand." I laughed bitterly. "Understand you sleeping with my husband?" "No." Vanessa slowly shook her head. "Understand why I hate you." Ethan stood several feet away, tense as a wire, but Vanessa ignored him. She removed her gloves and calmly placed her purse on the table. "My mother died when I was 21. Her voice was steady, almost casual. She drank herself to death in a cheap apartment in Queens. I stayed silent. Before she died, she always said the same thing. Vanessa looked directly into my eyes. That life was supposed to belong to us. The room suddenly felt suffocating. You want to blame me because my father cheated? Vanessa laughed softly. Cheated? She shook her head. Claire, your father didn't just cheat. He abandoned my mother and me like trash. Vanessa, Ethan started. Shut up! Her voice turned ice cold before she looked back at me. Daniel Calloway promised he would marry my mother. He promised he would take her out of that slum. But then he met your mother. My mother didn't know he already had a family. I know, Vanessa smirked faintly. And what exactly does that change? I couldn't answer, because the hatred in Vanessa's eyes had lived there for so long, it had become part of who she was. I grew up watching my mother lose her mind piece by piece, Vanessa continued, while you grew up with mansions, private schools, summer vacations in Europe. I laughed coldly. You think my life was perfect? Vanessa stared at me for a few seconds before speaking quietly. At least you were loved. That sentence silenced the entire room. I hated admitting it, but part of me understood that feeling. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, just understanding. But then Vanessa continued. At first, I only wanted to take back what belonged to me. By marrying my father? He was easier to manipulate than I expected, she shrugged. Old men are always stupid when they think younger women really love them. Ethan laughed bitterly behind us. You say that like you didn't do the exact same thing to me. Vanessa turned toward him, and her stare was cold enough to make my skin prickle. You were paid, Ethan. Don't act like the victim. Ethan went pale. I looked at both of them and suddenly realized the most horrifying thing of all. Neither of these people had ever truly loved anyone except themselves. Everything was a transaction. Sex, marriage, family. All just tools. So what now? I asked. Why are you here? Vanessa stared at me for a long moment. Then she opened her purse and placed a black folder onto the table. Sign it. I frowned. What is this? Transfer documents, Vanessa answered calmly. The last assets your father left under your name. Ethan immediately stepped forward. Have you lost your mind? Vanessa ignored him. If Claire signs, everything ends. I opened the folder. It was ownership transfer paperwork for the house my mother left me, along with an investment fund worth nearly $3 million that I never even knew existed. My heartbeat pounded violently. And if I don't sign? Vanessa looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something truly terrifying in her eyes. Not anger, not hatred, desperation. Then people will keep dying. Ethan instantly stepped in front of me. Vanessa, stop. But she only smiled faintly. You think you still have choices? Then Vanessa slowly pulled something from inside her coat pocket. A small silver handgun. I heard Ethan curse. The blood inside me froze solid. Vanessa never blinked as she stared at me. Sign the papers, Claire. Outside the windows, distant car horns echoed through the streets of Boston. But inside the apartment, everything was so silent I could hear my own breathing. And then Vanessa's phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the screen, distracted for just 1 second. That single moment changed everything. Ethan lunged at her. The gunshot exploded through the apartment. The first gunshot made my ears ring instantly. I screamed on instinct and crashed hard onto the living room floor. For the first few seconds, I didn't even know who had been shot. Ethan and Vanessa were struggling beside the dining table. The gun hit the hardwood floor and slid underneath the couch. Vanessa clawed at him like a cornered animal. Ethan gripped her wrist tightly, his face red with effort. Claire, run! I tried to stand, but my legs gave out beneath me. My heart pounded so violently I felt sick. And then I saw the blood. Blood running down Ethan's arm. He'd been shot. Vanessa suddenly drove her knee into Ethan's stomach, forcing him off her. Immediately, she dove toward the floor, reaching for the gun. I didn't think. I grabbed the table lamp beside me and swung it as hard as I could into Vanessa's shoulder. A sharp crack echoed through the apartment. She screamed. It was the first time in my life I had ever truly hit someone, and the feeling was more horrifying than I expected. Vanessa whipped around toward me with completely insane eyes. Her hair was disheveled, lipstick smeared across the corner of her mouth. Nothing about her resembled the elegant socialite anymore. Only a woman consumed by hatred her entire life. You, she screamed. This is all your fault. Then she lunged straight at me. Before I could react, Ethan yanked me behind him just as Vanessa managed to grab the gun from beneath the couch. "Put it down!" Ethan shouted. But Vanessa only smiled, a twisted smile that made my skin crawl. "You think I have anything left to lose?" Then she pointed the gun directly at me. That moment stretched endlessly. I stared into the silver barrel and realized something strange. I wasn't afraid anymore, just tired. Tired down to my bones. 15 years of manipulation, 7 years of lies disguised as marriage, a lost child, a dead father. Everything had led to this exact moment. But then something happened that none of us expected. Ethan stepped in front of me. "No," his voice trembled. "Don't do this." Vanessa froze for several seconds. "You're protecting her?" Ethan looked at her with an expression I had never seen before. No obsession, no lust, only exhaustion and regret. "It's over, Vanessa." She burst into laughter. The sound echoed through the apartment like a madwoman losing her mind. "Oh my God," she said between laughs. "You finally really love her, don't you?" Ethan didn't answer, and that silence changed Vanessa's face completely. I watched the exact moment her heart broke, not because of love, but because she had finally lost control. Vanessa always needed people to worship her. My father, Ethan, even me in some twisted way. But now Ethan was standing in front of me, choosing me, and it drove her insane. "You're such a fool," Vanessa whispered. "After everything, you still chose her." Ethan's voice turned rough. "I've never chosen the right thing in my life." Then he looked at me, and for the first time in a very long time, I saw the real him. No performance, no manipulation, just a broken human being. "Claire," his voice nearly cracked. "I'm sorry." I didn't know what I felt in that moment. Not forgiveness, maybe not even hatred anymore. Just emptiness. Vanessa looked at both of us and tightened her grip on the gun. "Funny, isn't it?" she said softly. "I spent my whole life trying to steal your life." Her eyes locked onto mine, and all I did was make people love you more. And then she turned the gun toward herself. "No!" Ethan lunged forward, but it was too late. The second gunshot exploded through the apartment. Vanessa collapsed onto the floor right in front of me. Blood spread beneath her blonde hair like dark red paint. I stood frozen. Ethan dropped to his knees beside her automatically. "Jesus Christ, Vanessa!" She was still breathing, weakly, painfully, but alive. And the most terrifying thing was, she was smiling. Blood spilled from the corner of her mouth as she looked at me one last time. "You know," she whispered weakly, "I think I really did want a sister once." My throat tightened painfully. "Vanessa." But she only closed her eyes. The smile still remained on her lips. And then police sirens echoed below the building. Ethan sat in the middle of the floor, both hands covered in blood. I stared at the man who used to be my husband for a very long time. He looked up at me with red, exhausted eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I stayed silent. Ethan gave a bitter, painful laugh. "But at least, this time I finally chose the right thing." 2 months later, Vanessa died in the hospital from complications caused by the gunshot wound that night. Before she died, she confessed to everything, including switching my father's heart medication. Ethan was sentenced to 18 years in prison for conspiracy, financial fraud, destruction of evidence, and attempted harm. But saving my life that night significantly reduced his sentence. I testified against him in court, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Not because I still loved him, but because part of me understood that Ethan was also just a weak man, slowly dragged into hell by greed and Vanessa's manipulation. Still, the final choices were his, and he had to pay for them. 6 months after the trial, I sold the Boston apartment and moved to Seattle. I started therapy. I learned how to sleep without waking up screaming from nightmares. I learned how to look in the mirror without seeing a fool. I thought everything was finally over. Until one rainy afternoon in October, Marcus called me. "Claire, the police found a hidden safe that belonged to Vanessa." My chest tightened slightly. What was inside? Marcus was silent for a few seconds. Pictures of you. I frowned. Pictures? Hundreds of them. His voice lowered. From when you were a child. That night I went to the police station, and then I saw them. Pictures of me in high school. Pictures from graduation. Pictures from my wedding day. Pictures of me holding my pregnant stomach before the miscarriage. There was even a photo of me asleep through my bedroom window. On the back of every single photograph, the same handwritten sentence appeared. This life was supposed to be mine. I stood there staring at those photos for a very long time. Then Marcus handed me one final envelope. This was at the bottom of the safe. I opened it. Inside was a letter Vanessa had written before she died. Only one sentence. Claire, don't become me. I sat there staring at those words for nearly an hour, and for the first time after everything, I cried.